Hey there, fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Meaghan.
And I'm Shirin.
And it is the last week of March.
The last month of March.
The last month of March. This is how long everything feels. Actually, I should say, you know what? It's not really the last week of March. It's the last week of our coverage of folklore and mythology for the month of March. Technically. Next week, we're just coming to you with something totally random, so just get ready for that.
We like doing those.
Yeah, it's fun. You know what? It just gets us out of like our routine or pattern every once in a while, and I'm fine with it. So that's what we're doing. So to close out everything, I feel like every episode that we've done so far this month has been very Greek mythology heavy.
We should have just called it Greek Mythology Month.
Yeah, but I didn't want to just talk about it, which is why we have this episode today, because today we're actually going to talk about mythology retellings and popular stories and things, and sort of, again, maybe why those are so popular that aren't Greek mythology based. Those ones that have been popping up, because yes, I will say, yes, the Greek mythology is what's like leading the charge here. Yeah. But then I guess what's kind of fun about this is that all kinds of, writers with all kinds of knowledge and research that they've done, or maybe their own personal history or cultural backgrounds or things like that gives them kind of a whole knowledge base about folklore from different places globally, which is really fun. Yeah. Love that.
Love that for us.
Love that for the world and the book community at large. Keep doing that. Keep doing that, guys. We love that. Anyway, so before we get started and before we start talking about all of those non-Greek mythology retellings, Shirin, what's on your nightstand?
I started reading Bride by Ali Hazelwood.
Yeah, you did.
I think it was quite anticipated. I'm not very far in. I'm only a couple of chapters in. Mm-hmm. I thought it was going to have more Twilight vibes, or maybe I was hoping it was going to have
way more Underworld. You said this
a lot more Underworld vibes.
Yeah.
Funny, I started reading this before Meaghan did. She's finished. But anyway, I'm looking forward to see where this goes. It's basically an arranged marriage between a vampire and a werewolf. He's like the alpha werewolf.
And she's like the daughter of one of the very powerful vampires.
Yeah. And this poor girl, by the sounds of it, she's always just kind of being used as bait everywhere she goes. She's like vampire bait.
It's true. I will say, what I will say about it is that, so this will be the third Ali Hazelwood book that I've read. I read
my second.
The Love Hypothesis one there that
Kylo
you read.
Ren fan fiction.
Yeah, that one. And I read Love Theoretically, which I think came out last year or the year before. I forget. So those are, because a lot of the stuff that she's been doing up until about a year ago was very STEM based, so very women in science falling in love, which is its own subgenre in romance. That's a thing. Mm-hmm. I've read a few of those, but I wasn't I haven't been a big fan of Ali Hazelwood's stuff. Some of it's a little bit too tropey for me, and I guess because they're so popular, maybe I was expecting a little bit more out of them when I read them, and I didn't get it, and I was like, oh, okay. Also, the virginal subplot trope, it gets on my nerves after a while.
Oh, in this one?
I'm a virgin. No, but I'm all of them.
All of her stuff, yeah.
I love Theoretically, I don't believe she's a virgin, but she's had sex with one or two people, and it's been terrible every time, and I'm okay. All right.
I know. It's we are not all waiting for men to save us with their
penises. With their penises, and it's not just that we need out of a relationship.
No.
So there are many aspects. Anyway, whatever.
What's on your nightstand, Meaghan?
So I did read Bride, obviously. I liked it better, I think, than the other two that I've read so far. Maybe, you know what? I think the protagonist, she was a little bit kookier. Yeah. A little bit goofier than the other ones that I've read. So I liked her. Okay. So I thought she was kind of fun. And I was like, yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah, she definitely does have more of a personality than
a little bit, yeah.
The other one that I've read from Ali Hazelwood. So I appreciate that. We'll see where it goes.
And, I never mind that. I will say, spoiler. There, I think, again, I've seen no confirmation of this online, but based on the end of the novel, I feel like we're setting up for a sequel.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, these types of books are the ones that you could definitely have multiple books in the series.
True. Right. So anyway, I read Bride. And also, I recently finished None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, which was published in 2023, I believe. as Lisa Jewell being Lisa Jewell, obviously like psychological thriller type of thing. That's like her bread and butter. Really good though. I had also, like, I know I talked about this in a previous episode that I had like brought books on vacation, obviously. This was another one that I had brought with me, and just like the perfect kind of like vacation beach read.
Right.
Not necessarily like super action packed immediately, but interesting off the cuff and gets right into the story and like the weirdness of it, where you're like, okay, what's happening? What's going on? Why? Why is any of this? Super brief overview. It follows two women who encounter one another one evening at a restaurant when they both realize that they are there on the same night at the same time on the same day, celebrating the same birthday. They're both turning 45, so they were both born on the same day, the same year kind of thing. And then one of them approaches the other and is like, hey, you're my birthday twin kind of thing, just like as a casual thing. And then they start to get to know one another. One of them is a podcast producer and they decide to start working on a podcast series together about the other woman's life. And I won't go into any more detail than that because it would give away like anything, and it's just not worth giving away at all. It's actually quite interesting. There's like 4 different twists at the end of the book that you're like, whoa.
Did not see that coming.
Okay. Yeah. And it was like a really good, really fast paced read that you get right into. I think I had sat down like by the pool where I was on vacation and was like, like my fiance was off elsewhere. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna like sit down and maybe like I'll go get a drink or I'll go do something like in like a half hour. Like I'll read a couple of chapters. He popped up later on. He'd gone to like go to the gym and get food and stuff. He popped up later on. I think I was 200 pages in and I had not moved at all. Because I was just like, well, fuck, I'm just going to read another chapter now. Okay, well, now I want to understand what that means. I'm just going to read another chapter. And then, that was kind of like
those types of books.
Yeah, it really like the perfect kind of like a vacation read.
Yeah.
Psychological thrillers and like thrillers in general, I find are really good like beach read types of stories because they tend to be like very fast paced and they're really easy to get through. But I do love an experience like that where I'm lounging somewhere and I can, whether it's like, yes, I'm on vacation, but sometimes it's also like just during the summer I'm lounging or I'm doing this or I'm doing that and like taking a bit of time and I can just get lost in a story. I love that.
Best time.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so this is why we're here. Okay, so I feel like, I guess, in getting into like the mythology or folklore, I have to stop calling it just mythology because it really is like sort of like folkloric stories in general.
Sorry.
What are you laughing about?
Thinking of you texting me the other day being like, we need folklore stories. And I'm like, all I can think of is Taylor Swift's album Folklore.
Oh my God.
And you're like, I'm going to need you to focus a little bit more.
Yeah, she sends me this and I'm like, I'm going to need you to work a little bit harder to reach me.
Meaghan is the backbone of everything we do. If you have not already figured this out by listening to us,
you need to. Okay, we need to be able to balance.
She can't talk to herself, and that's why I'm here.
We need to be able to balance each other out. Okay, we both have really good ideas about things. We need to be able to balance each other out. That's why we're here together, and that's why we're doing it. Because if not, it would be really boring if either of us were doing this by ourselves.
Oh yeah, you'd get nothing done if it was just me by myself. I'd be like, podcast, what?
Oh shit, I meant to do like 3 months ago and I totally forgot.
Sorry. Taking us off track. Please continue.
It's fine. Anyway, I like to think that I guess like one of the best sources for regularly contributing to the like folklore and mythology retelling genre is probably Neil Gaiman.
Oh yeah.
With American Gods obviously being like probably his most prolific, but he also has Norse Mythology, which is a collection of short stories, and Anansi Boys, which is also based in African folklore as well.
Didn't he have Egyptian in there as well?
I don't know.
Maybe. Anyway.
He might have done with something else, but maybe I haven't come across it.
He had them in American Gods. He had the Egyptian
He
gods.
did, yeah, because American Gods, if you don't know about it, really spans, like, it's like international deities. Yeah. It's not just like, it's just that these deities have found themselves in North America because they have been, quote unquote, like sort of spiritually brought over by people who have, left their home countries and settled in the United States. Yeah. And then obviously generations of sort of like mixing of cultures and things like that has also caused like a loss in faith and things like that as well in a more modern society. And so these gods are less powerful. They're dying out. And
they're being replaced by new gods, which are the things that we now, worship.
Technology and things.
Media.
Yes, yeah. All of those sorts of things. So it's a fantastic, like, really fascinating book if you haven't read it.
Written.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's really great.
The show is okay, but after like the first season, it's like it really should have been like a 1-season show.
It would have been better if they had done pretty much the entire thing as a limited series.
Yeah.
I think that would have been fine.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we do oftentimes the media does try to like milk more out.
And they have some pretty good actors in that show.
They do. Oh my God, so many. But my understanding too is that there were many problems with production.
Yeah.
And things of that sort as well. So, so I can understand that obviously things didn't, go that well. So so I would say that Neil Gaiman is definitely right up there as someone who you can look to for inspiration if you're like, I want to read more like folklore stories and things like that, and like fun new versions and twists on things, but not always Greek mythology. Like maybe I'd like to read about something else for once, which is totally fine. Yes, the Greek mythology is good, but sometimes we want other stuff too.
Yep.
There are a couple of other ones that are based in like Norse mythology. Yep. American Gods touches on that a lot, obviously.
He literally has one called Norse Mythology.
Yes, as well as his that's it, his tome about Norse mythology specifically. There's also a book called The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek, which also is based around Odin and Loki,
right? Okay.
And much of like a lot of things to do with them. That's also like quite popular. It's supposed to be really good. I've heard a lot of really positive things about that.
And we're not too far removed from like Norse mythology.
We're
because
not,
of
no.
Marvel, right? Like because of
we
Thor
actually know the
Loki.
names.
Like I think that I think Neil Gaiman wrote American Gods like a while ago.
But in the 90s, I believe
think it was in the 90s. Yeah. And, we've seen this bit of resurgence just because of the Marvel movies and shows. But I think, seeing that tie-in, we're a little bit more familiar when we see Odin, Thor, Loki. We're like, oh, yeah, those guys.
Yeah. So I think those are, if you're looking, I guess, for like something easy to get into, I feel like that would be simple because we have a base of knowledge already. Like, yes, it's changed a lot and everything from the original folklore and the mythology that exists around these deities, but we actually like the names are familiar and you're not just like, I don't know what that is, like, as opposed to potentially getting into certain other like, mythology and folklore from other countries that are perhaps less well known now in more modern times.
Oh, for sure.
So you won't be as likely to be aware of it.
And I think that like, going back to what we're talking about here, just as these trends or authors bring them back into like pop culture, then it tends to snowball and we tend to see more stuff coming out about these same characters
for sure,
or whoever they are.
I think that quietly, without people even really being aware of it, we're actually seeing more and more, because I think the majority of the time they're classified as fantasy, which does make sense. I think that we aren't aware that much, but actually we are seeing like a decent number of folklore-based retellings or inspiration, whatever, in more modern novels based around both Chinese folklore and also African folklore. What is it, Children of Blood and Bone and things like that. Like a lot of these series that are becoming really, really popular are actually based in folklore from these areas. There's also Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. It's like the Celestial something series. There are 2 or 3 of those books. Those are based on
looking at that.
Those are based on the I believe the Chinese folklore tales about the moon goddess, if I'm not mistaken. Those are based in that. And you can also like then I find after those it's kind of interspersed just like random other stuff until you get into certain other things like Arthurian retellings. Arthurian retellings are like their own fucking thing. Like when I was a teenager, I read a whole bunch of Meg Cabot.
Yeah.
And when I was reading a whole bunch of Meg Cabot, it was very, very easy for me to read Avalon High, which is a King Arthur retelling. And I find, anyway, ahead of its time because focused on a character who is based in The Lady of Shalott, which is something that we're seeing a lot more now.
Alfred Lord Tennyson.
Yeah. Which is something that we're seeing a lot more now with Arthurian retellings than we were before, like in the sense that before it used to be based on, well, no, it's just Arthur and Lancelot and Guinevere, and that's all we're paying attention to. But The Lady of Shalott is like having more of a moment now, and I guess I didn't pay attention to it that much when I initially read that book, but it's interesting, I find, because there's that novel, and there's also a novel that's quite popular by an author named Laura Sebastian called Half Sick of Shadows, which is also about The Lady of Shalott as well.
I mean, there's also been like a couple of remakes of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
I saw that latest one with Dev Patel from a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and I know that I believe like Seamus Heaney, for example, Irish poet Seamus Heaney has done like his adaptations of Sir Gawain and also Beowulf.
Yes.
You know, so like these are very old,
very
folklore
old. Yes, exactly.
stories. And even if you look back to like Beowulf, authors throughout the last, century have been pulling from these stories to write their own version. So like take Tolkien, for example.
Yes, true.
He based The Hobbit basically, well, it wasn't fully based on Beowulf, but a lot from there. And then a lot of what Tolkien wrote was drawn from, folklore mythology to make his languages, his characters, etc.
Right, yeah. I know there's a YA novel that was published within the last couple of years, Legendborn, which I believe is also like a gender bent kind of retelling of like a modern Arthurian tale of some kind, like special school Merlin character, young girl who's there who discovers like all of this stuff. Anyway, which is interesting as well. But there are a lot of them that are like showing up now, and we're just like not aware of it really. And
we're just not aware of like the roots of where it came from.
Exactly.
Right?
And I think that's because, again, if you don't grow up learning about, folklore and mythology from different countries globally, which the majority of us don't, let's be real, you're less likely to kind of like be aware of these things, but that's it. Again, it's like every once in a while you get these ones that like sneak through, like the, I think it's the Winter Song trilogy by Catherine Arden. That is one that's had three books. I think it's already had all three of them have been published at this point, which is based in Russian folk tales,
right,
and things like that, like The Bear and the Nightingale. I think a lot of people would have seen that's the first novel in the trilogy. That one had been really popular, and then it wound up becoming a trilogy from that point. So that's based in Russian folklore. Silvia Moreno Garcia, who's a Mexican author, she's had a good few novels published in different sort of horror subgenres to a degree. Mexican Gothic was a really popular one for her, and I know that there was a vampire novel as well that I cannot remember the name of right now. But she also has a novel called The Gods of Jade and Shadow, which is based in Mayan folklore. Basically,
it's really interesting when you start lifting up the lid to see like what is being published right now, what's popular now, and if there's any roots in, like Greek mythology is one thing.
It's its own thing.
But when you start really pulling up like all the different like, folklores, mythologies, like, it would be really interesting to see just how many of them are based on, like, I know that we've started to see a bit of a resurgence in even like indigenous retellings of stories and that type.
Based in, that's it, like folklore and older tales and things like that. And I mean, much of the time, reading novels from indigenous authors, they have a tendency to, a lot of the time, like the characters themselves and the story itself in the book can kind of be interwoven a little bit with their own folklore and their own backgrounds, which is like, something that we ourselves on the other side of the spectrum don't really see as regularly on our own, which might be why we cling to the idea of like Greek mythology retellings so much to an extent, because, it's so available. And they're just tales that we're aware of. Hercules, like all of this stuff, like they're just things that we're aware of because they're very popularized. I actually was looking and I had no idea that this was a thing, because I thought that Rick Riordan had done like the Percy Jackson series. I hadn't realized, but it turns out he has another series called the Kane Chronicles, which apparently is based in Egyptian mythology.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Which I was like, okay, which I think like falls into the same category in terms of like sort of like young adult, middle grade kind of things within that sphere. But I thought it was interesting. I was like, oh, see, like, look, like people are touching on all sorts of different things.
I'm surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if we see, with the trend recently, if we see something around like, ancient Egypt starts coming up, like a lot of characters from that.
I'm a little bit surprised that we haven't seen that more, eh?
I mean, that was pretty big, like what, in the late 90s, early 2000s?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing it pop up again.
I would be really, really curious, like outside of just like period pieces and things like that they do, I would be really curious and think it would be really interesting if we started seeing like maybe larger scale productions coming out of the UK based in like Celtic mythology. Would be something that would be really interesting to see.
Yes. I mean, there's definitely a lot to explore there.
Yeah, there are a ton of like folk tales and things like that someone could base something on, and I'm sure that it does exist to a degree, but I feel like it's not like a market that's been tapped very much.
Well, there you go, folks. We're giving you ideas. Take it and run.
No, but I would be really curious about that. I'm really curious to see if since again there's so much history and so many like folk tales that could be used. I would be really curious to see if we're going to see any adaptations in terms of African folklore and older folk tales and things like that. Like that would be a really interesting dynamic and aspect of things to explore that we just like haven't really gotten around to.
Yeah, like these famous characters that we never get a chance to like read about or hear about their perspective, or the opposite perspective. Maybe there's somebody else in the story who wasn't the main character that we're so used to hearing about.
And we've started doing that, like we've spoken about previously with like Greek mythology, where you're getting perspectives of different people who are not like the quote unquote like main focus of the original story. And I feel like,
but they were an instrument to the plot.
And I wonder if to an extent we could start maybe seeing that with other like mythology retellings and folklore retellings in general. It would be interesting to see.
I'd be very curious to see like also like Middle Eastern like folklore.
That would be really interesting. There's so much there. I mean, like in novels, I feel like we're starting a little bit. I know there's a novel called The Wrath and the Dawn, which is part of a duology, which is actually quite popular, that I think has to do with Scheherazade. Okay. If I'm not mistaken.
Is that,
I think
Iranian?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
But I would be curious to see. Yeah, like that's it. Just from a lot of places, like more in terms of like indigenous representation would be interesting. More in terms of representation, more internationally. So from all these, like, we're just so focused in North America on like one thing, but I'm like, but take from all of these older nations, from Asia, from Africa, from India, from all of these places. It would be so interesting
anywhere
to
that
see.
had like an empire.
Yeah,
think about it. Like, the Ottoman Empire, the Persian Empire. Like, there's got to be tons of like folklore and mythology retellings that can be done.
Yeah, because I mean, think about how like young we are in comparison to so many other places in the world. Those places,
thousands of years old.
That's it. Those places have the history that's built up and these tales that have been passed down from generation to generation. And it would just be really interesting to see what could be done.
Yeah.
With those in terms of novels, yes, but then also in terms of like, hey, let's put that out there to a wider audience. So in terms of adaptations and things that we could be seeing, it would be interesting.
Well, it would also help us, like, again, like the way we're talking about this is to take these I guess cultures and the stories from these cultures and make them modern so that, they would appeal to an audience, you know, who's a younger audience who wants to read more about this with our own, I don't know, tropes and things that we enjoy. So just taking, again, the example of like your Hades and Persephone, you know, that came back up because of like our spicy, like, you know, preferences. And we found a way of meeting them in the middle. But wouldn't it be such an interesting way, you know, the more we would see these, the more we would learn about other cultures and backgrounds from like a different perspective. And it might just kind of widen our mindsets to help us realize that actually, you know, we're all kind of coming from the same types of stories, you know?
Yeah, it would be a really interesting thing to see happen. Let's hope it does. Yeah. Let's just hope it does.
Definitely.
But anyway, what are your favorite types of retellings that aren't necessarily like, you know, Greek mythology? Like, you know, do you have any other particular niche that you've really enjoyed or specific stories that you've really enjoyed? And do you have any others that maybe like you would really like to see any publications from about like really specific ones that haven't been touched upon as of yet? Who knows, right? Yeah. So you can let us know about that over on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads.
Oh, yeah.
I'll get there.
And our website.
I'll get there, at fullybookedca. Yeah. You can also check out our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/book is way better. It's the end of the day, and it shows. Until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.